Nikole Hannah-Jones is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter covering racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine and creator of the landmark 1619 Project. The New York Times 1619 Project commemorates the 400th anniversary of the beginning of slavery and reframes the way we understand this history and the contributions of Black Americans to the nation. We're pleased to have civil rights attorney, media personality, and best-selling author Areva Martin here with us to engage in a very interesting conversation with Nikole about race, social injustice, and reparations. Areva, tell us more about the Black girl magic of Nikole Hannah-Jones.
I'm Areva Martin. I'm an author, a civil rights attorney, CNN legal analyst, and host of Areva Martin Out Loud on KBLA Talk 1580. And once again, I am so excited to be a part of the special virtual event of the 15th Annual Leimert Park Book Fair, an event that has promoted literacy and love of reading in the African American community for over a decade. We have a very special conversation for you today with an amazing author and thought leader who exemplifies Black girl magic. That is Nikole Hannah-Jones. You all know her. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning creator of the 1619 Project and a staff writer at the New York Times Magazine. As you know, the 1619 Project helps to explain not only the persistence of anti-Black racism and inequality in American life today, but its roots and what makes this country unique. As a follow-up to the book, 1619 Project, A New Origin Story, Nikole continues the conversation as a definitive account of how racism and Black resistance have shaped this nation. Now, see, Nikole has spent her career investigating racial inequality and injustice, and her reporting has earned her many, many, many awards, including a MacArthur Fellowship. She was also named one of the most influential people in 2021 by Time Magazine. Currently, Nikole is the Knight Chair in Race and Journalism at Howard University, where she has founded the Center for Journalism and Democracy. I am so pleased to welcome the Black girl magic of Nikole Hannah-Jones to the 15th Annual Leimert Park Village Book Fair.
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm just excited to be in conversation. This is such an important book fair and such an important community. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, Nikole, I don't think there's anyone that has not heard about the 1619 Project. And I hope there's not anyone that hasn't gotten a copy already of your book, but of course they will be available during the Leimert Park Village Book Fair. And this is such an honor for me because last year I had the privilege of having the fourth book that I've written be featured at the book fair. So I know how important this book fair is to the Los Angeles community and really to the nation, because now with this virtual format, people all over the country will have an opportunity to tune in and learn about you and the 1619 Project. So I want to start first with just your inspiration. What was your inspiration for this incredible piece of groundbreaking work?
My inspiration for this work was really two things. One, I came across the date 1619 when I was a high school student in a one-semester Black Studies class that was taught actually by a man named Ray Dow, who's from California. And it was in a book he gave me by Lerone Bennett that I came across that date. And that was such a powerful date for me. One, because I had never heard of the year 1619. No one had ever taught us about the White Lion or, that African people had been here longer than the Pilgrims on the Mayflower. And also it really stood in for an erasure of Black lineage and how it helped me understand that people were choosing what we would learn. That what we were taught was not all that could be taught, but people had made selections. And so fast forward a few years since I was in high school, and the 400th anniversary of 1619 was approaching in 2019. I was no longer a high school student, but a journalist at the New York Times. And I really wanted to use that 400th anniversary to force a reckoning with the fact that slavery is one of the oldest American institutions, and that so much about modern American life, not just, the 1619 Project is not just about what happened a long time ago, but it's about the way that slavery has shaped so much of the society that we live in today. So that was really the inspiration behind the project.
Oftentimes, Nikole, we see people in our society that want to take projects like the 1619 Project, books like this book, and the teaching of African American history and make it the other. How is it that the 1619 Project and your work is really a story about all of America?
Absolutely. So part of the reason the 1619 Project had to exist is we treat our history as segregated, right? There's history, which is about what white people did, and then we have hyphenated histories, African American history, Latino history, Asian history, as if these are not all part of one intertwined story of America. And so what this project tries to do is really to assert, you can't understand America if you don't understand Black people's role in building this country, and that you can't actually separate those histories. They have to be told as a single cohesive history, because so much about our society was either around slavery, anti-Blackness, or Black resistance to slavery and Black determination to create an actual multiracial democracy. So it really is about showing that these legacies of slavery, they're not just impacting Black people, they're impacting everyone in our society. This is one history that needs to be told.
And it's so interesting that given the history of African Americans in this country, the fact that the transatlantic slave trade of 15 million people, a huge number of people, is the largest forced migration in the history of the world, reshaped the Atlantic and transformed the global economy. Yet, despite that history, there are still so many people that want to deny and distort the facts that America is really built on the backs of Black people. How is it that people can maintain that position given the significance of those 15 million people who were in this forced migration? I think that's always troubling to people. Like, how can you just resist these obvious facts?
Well, what I would argue is that our nation, and particularly those in power, have engaged in a centuries-long propaganda campaign. It is deeply troubling to at once want to believe that you are an exceptional nation founded on these ideals of God-given liberty, that we are the freest country in the history of the world, and then also grapple with how did a country that had founders who write, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. How do those men hold 1/5 of the population in bondage at the time that they wrote those words? So what we tend to do, of course, is really uphold the glorious parts of our history and try to erase or marginalize the more ugly parts of our history. And so many of us have been taught to believe that, yes, we all know that slavery occurred in the United States, but that it was kind of inconsequential, that it was just a few backwards, white men in the South, and it didn't have any larger impact on our society or our economy or our politics or our legal system. But that's just defied by the actual historic record and by facts. So it really is about us being unable to grapple truthfully with what we are, which is that, as the historian Edmund Morgan said, in America, slavery and freedom were created on the same day, at the same time. And we have always had these two kind of polarizing ideals and realities in America.
So when you think about, Nikole, you having taken the time and delved deeply into the history of slavery and its relationship to this country, when you see states trying to enact legislation to change the way slavery is taught, to even do away with the word slavery, to rewrite that history, to talk about slaves as if they were somehow immigrants, to equate them in the same way that we may see, immigrants coming across the border in places like Texas or Florida. How does that make you feel as a historian? Because if these legislators had their way, we would not be talking about slavery in the way that you talk about it in the 1619 Project.
Absolutely, Areva. What we know is that our history has always been politicized, right? Our history has always been contested. If you go all the way back to the lost cause narratives after slavery that tried to make the South seem like a benign, genteel part of the country, that slavery, wasn't that bad, that they treated us well, that this has always been something that has been deeply politicized. And in our country, when we have moments of demographic anxiety, when we have moments of extreme political polarizations, one of the first things that conservatives do is try to prohibit the teaching of our histories and our stories, and to really try to ignite what they're calling culture wars, to ban books, to ban curriculums, or to do as you're talking about, as they tried to do in Texas, is to create lies of omission, right? To obscure the facts of our history. So we shouldn't be surprised that this is happening, but we should be deeply troubled by it. Because whenever you see PEN America, which is a group that tracks free speech and infringements on free speech, says that we are seeing more efforts to ban and restrict books and ideas than we've seen in at least 40 years. And what that means is that is a sign of a democracy that is struggling, right? And a democracy that is eroding, because healthy societies don't ban books. And what I always say is it's fine if you don't like the 1619 Project. It's fine if you don't agree with the 1619 Project. There are any number of texts that I don't agree with or that I don't like. But what is not okay is when you use the power of the state to then try to prohibit the teaching of ideas and texts that you don't like. And we should all be opposed to that, no matter where we stand on any of these texts that are being challenged. And it's not, incidental that almost all the texts that are being challenged deal with marginalized people. They deal with Black people. They deal with other people of color. They deal with trans children, LGBT community. This targeting of marginalized groups, particularly in the classroom, is what people, conservatives do when they are trying to implement authoritarian policies.
And we see it, Nikole, this effort, some are overt efforts like you identified in Texas, but we also see some states trying to lump everything about Black history under this, this critical race theory mantra, and then rail against schools teaching critical race theory. And as a lawyer that was at Harvard with Professor Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, I know, like most folks, that critical race theory has never been taught in elementary school, in high school, that it is a concept and classes that are taught mostly in legal settings, law schools, other graduate level courses. But yet, what do you make of this effort now to turn everything that's about Black history into a CRT issue, and then say we've got to pass legislation to ban or prohibit the teaching of CRT that's not being taught already in schools? So it's such a distortion and gaslighting of communities, but yet it's taking root in cities and some counties across this country.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about is an intentional propaganda campaign, and we need to call it exactly what it is. One, what they're describing as critical race theory, as you noted, is not actually critical race theory. What they're calling critical race theory is the teaching of any concepts that they think make them uncomfortable. And by then they mean white children or white adults uncomfortable. They're lumping in, they're saying that critical race theory is about teachers teaching white children that they are the oppressor and Black children that they are the victim, when literally, as you know, critical race theory is about structural inequality. It doesn't actually concern itself with individual racism, but talks about the racism that is structured into our society. And frankly, I would be impressed and approve if schools were teaching critical race theory, because that would mean that they're having highly sophisticated conversations with their children about how a country that was built on a racial architecture continues to see that architecture in the systems, the larger systems and structures of our society. That's a sophisticated way of talking about race. Our teaching force is 80% white women. None of us believe that all of these white women are teaching white children that they are racist and they're the oppressor. So we know that this was propaganda, but propaganda can be highly successful. So the fact that we're all talking about critical race theory, the fact that they are using these lies about what critical race theory is to pass legislation to make it hard for teachers to talk about racism, racial inequality. Again, they're lumping any text about LGBTQ children, all of these texts of concepts that they just don't want children to learn. They're lumping it under this banner. And it's very hard to fight propaganda with truth, right? Because propaganda is necessarily simple. It is emotional. It carries easy. And the truth is much more complex and nuanced. So we shouldn't even call it critical race theory. I call these laws anti-history laws, anti-memory laws, or memory laws, but they're not actually critical race theory, as you know.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating, obviously, because we know so many of these people who are putting forth these laws have no idea themselves what critical race theory is. Right. They've never been taught it. They're never engaged in a conversation with a professor like yourself, or a law school professor about critical race theory. It's been put into the popular culture to create these culture wars. They're very purposely done. We know the white man who set out on this mission to do so, to popularize the term and to use it as a way to drive a wedge between conservatives and liberals and blacks and whites. And in some places, he's being very successful. But we know there's something called radical resistance, radical Black resistance. You talk a lot about it in the book, the radical resistance of slaves. But talk about how we're seeing some of that radical resistance play out in today's society, because it's not slavery that we're fighting against, but we are fighting against these efforts to erase Black history, to erase Black culture, and to minimize the ongoing racist attacks that are being made on Black people and Black communities every day in this country.
Absolutely. One thing we understand as Black people is that there will always be a struggle, right? As Coretta Scott King said, freedom must be won and re-won by every generation. And so what we're seeing, we have seen before. And even though it's exhausting that we have to keep fighting, what choice do we have? So as we speak, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, right, one of the innovators of critical race theory, is on a banned book tour. She's going into communities and giving out free books that are on the banned book list, including the 1619 Project and the children's book Born on the Water. I've launched a banned book tour where I'm going directly into those states like Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, Georgia, that are seeking to ban the 1619 Project, and showing my support for educators and librarians that are really facing threats of violence, closure of libraries, right? Actually, legal prosecution in some places. They're being fired. They really need our support. So what we have to do as people, no matter what your race is we cannot allow legislatures and legislators to legislate in our name these regressive policies that we don't agree with. The opposition is extremely organized. I'm not going to mention that man's name who led this entire campaign. Exactly. Because I'm not giving him any free advertising, but he was explicit. This was an orchestrated campaign, and there's all this money and all this organizing that's leading to these book bans. And those of us who believe in true freedom of speech, who believe in treating all people with respect, who believe that learning about communities that are different from yours and ideas that are different from yours build tolerance, we have not been nearly as organized. But I think many of us are waking up and realizing we have to get out there and fight just as hard as those who want to pass these regressive laws in our name. And that's what we have done, right? I talk about, of all the contention over the 1619 Project, what I think so much of it is really about is that I place Black Americans as the primary democratizing force in this country, that we have been the most ardent freedom fighters this country has ever seen. And I try to really subvert this narrative of who our founding fathers were. The men we call our founding fathers had these lofty ideals, but they didn't actually believe in them. And they certainly didn't believe in them for people like us. But Black people saw those ideas and have fought to make them true. So we will continue to play that role in this country. We don't have a choice. And I think, as you said, radical Black resistance has been what we have done since 1619, when we stepped off the white lion, and what we will continue to do now.
What do you say, Nikole, to those people at home who are listening to this, watching this, who aren't going to be able to go on these book tours, who are not going to be able to go into these states like Texas and Florida and Georgia and raise their voices in a way, obviously, that someone like you and Kimberly Crenshaw and other authors and educators can do? What can everyday people do who maybe they're facing this at their kids' school or their grandkids' school, or maybe even on their jobs? They're facing people who are resisting this notion that there is institutional racism, and resisting the concepts in this book about the relationship of slavery in this country, and how the impact of slavery still permeates pretty much every institution in this country today. What advice do you have for them?
Absolutely. I mean, we all have a role to play. I have a big platform, so I try to use the megaphone of my platform, but a regular person can go to that school board meeting when these oppositions, when these other groups are coming and trying to get these laws passed or books taken off the shelves. You know, you can go to that school board meeting. You can send your teachers a letter of support. It goes a long way. I can tell as someone who's been attacked quite a bit, it goes a long way when you open your email and everything in there is not an attack on you, but there's a letter in there saying, I appreciate what you're doing. We support you. You know, you can write your legislatures and say, you know, I oppose these types of bills. These bills should not be happening in a free society. You can donate books to places that are having a difficult time getting those books. And many of us have worked with Black bookstores in states that have these book bans and are just purchasing books and telling people go in and get this book for free because you can't get it at your school anymore. So there's many things that we as individuals can do. And what I hope people will take, if you read the 1619 Project, if you understand our history, is that none of us are powerless. If people who had, you know, our enslaved ancestors had no recognized rights in our society, and yet they found ways big and small to resist, whether they were breaking tools or running away or poisoning the master, right? There's a scale. There's a scale to how we can resist. And each and every one of us has a power to enact some sort of change.
Yeah, I like that you say everybody has the power to do something. You don't have to be Harriet Tubman.
That's
you
right.
Lead slaves, you know, away from the South, but there is something that everyone can do. I interviewed a teacher who did exactly what you're talking about doing. He started buying books and leaving them at local coffee shops in his Florida community, telling his students, you know, don't buy that coffee shop. You know, there's something there for you, and giving the students in his class an opportunity to pick those books up away from the school, so he wasn't violating any of the school's, you know, regulations and prohibitions, but he was giving students an opportunity to pick up books like The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which has been banned in many of these states that we're talking about. But you talk about attacks, and your book, The 1619, or the project that was, you know, that came out during the Trump era. Yes. And I can recall the vicious and vile attacks, and I'm watching them from afar. So you're living these attacks, like you said, you know, emails and social media attacks and pundits on television. I can only imagine, you know, what your inbox looked like on your computer. But tell us, how did you deal with that? Because, you know, a lot of people have gone off social media. I'm thinking of Leslie Jones. You know, she was attacked so, you know, the attacks were so ferocious and that she actually shut down her Twitter account at one point. How did you deal with just the vile attacks from those on the right, including people in the highest office in this land?
Yeah, you know, it depended on the day, honestly. You know, it's easy to say, oh, it didn't bother me, but it did, right? It can be frightening when the president of the United States is attacking you. It can be just exhausting, just the amount of attacks and people saying things that have no truth whatsoever. You know, I didn't get into journalism to become a public figure, but I've somehow become this symbol, either a symbol that people love or a symbol that people hate. But 3 years after the 1619 Project, I really have come to this place of zen. I'm not off social media, but I engage very infrequently on social media. I don't argue with people anymore, because what I've realized, and a very good friend of me told me this, is that, Nikole, you're winning, right? Like, the fact that they keep attacking you, the fact that they can't stop bringing your name up, they can't stop bringing the 1619 Project up, it means that they are afraid of this project, right? And they cannot take away what this project means to your community. And the only person who can do that is you, right? So I'm the only one that can discredit my work and how I respond and how I behave. And so I've really learned to take it as a badge of honor that so many powerful people would try to attack this project. I didn't become a journalist to make powerful people comfortable. You can't tell an honest story about slavery and anti-Black racism and not make powerful people upset. If powerful people love this project would have been a failure. So I'm all good right now. I've learned to deal well with it and to take it as one of the greatest compliments of my career, that you could write a work of journalism that has conservative politicians so afraid that they literally want to ban it by law.
Well, one of my favorite quotes from one of my girl crushes, who happens to be Lizzo, this is her response. This is her clap back to a critique from our good friend Kanye West. She says, "I'm minding my fat, Black, beautiful business." And you know, she's famous for screaming out the B word that I won't say and saying that she's winning. So I'm glad to hear that you also are at that place of Zen where you are embracing the fact that you are minding your beautiful Black business and that you are also winning, in the words of Lizzo. I do want to ask you before I let you go, though, about racial progress, because I think that's what's making the folks on the right, the conservatives, the MAGA crowd so nervous, is this notion that we could make racial progress in this country. Now, there is the myth of racial progress that was, you know, promulgated and disseminated when Obama was elected in 2008, and we were in this alleged post-racial period in our country. So I'm not talking about that, you know, that gaslighting that took place after Obama's election, but I'm talking about real racial progress. And I don't know if you know Lady Hubbard. She is a fiction writer. She wrote a book just out too called The Last Suspicious Holdout. And it's about Black couples of Black people in this mythical suburban area grappling with this notion of what racial progress really is. So when you think about racial progress, you know, how would you define where we are in this moment?
You know, the second to the last essay in the 1619 book is an essay by Ibram X. Kendi called Progress. And it talks about how in this society, we really are obsessed with this notion of progress and that we're always moving forward. We're always becoming a better society. So, you know, things were bad a long time ago and things aren't great now, but they're going to get better in the future because progress is inevitable. But what he argues is that we have moments of racial progress and then we have moments of racist progress. And we are clearly in a period of racist progress, right? Where the gains that we thought we made under a first Black president, the gains that Black people were starting to make in things like home ownership, that was seen, or even symbolic gains like taking certain political positions that we had never been in before, that for many people in this country, that was not a sign of progress. And so you follow the first Black president with an openly white nationalist president, and now a political party that no longer believes in democracy, if democracy means sharing power with people of color. So I think we're actually in a period of racist progress where, yes, there are individual Black people who are achieving great things, but the circumstance for most Black people has not gotten any better. And in fact, our political rights are being eroded. And we have to always be vigilant about these periods where if we think everything will be okay, it necessarily won't be. And we're going to decide what country we're going to be. I think at this next midterm, a lot will be determined about the state of our democracy. And as the most vulnerable citizens in our democracy, Black Americans, of course, have the most to lose.
Yeah, I love that concept of racist progress. I don't know if you've been tracking this story that's happening in Los Angeles, where these 3 Latino city council members are recorded, caught on audio tape, making, you know, the most vile racist comments, including comments about a little Black child, referring to that child as a monkey, and talking about white members of the council as being with the Blacks, and calling our white district attorney, you know, as being like the Blacks. And for a lot of people, they're grappling with what was supposed to be this coalition between Black and brown people. What impact do you think this period where we had Donald Trump in office and the rise of not the you know, we know white nationalists and white supremacists existed way before Donald Trump, but the way they became so emboldened, started saying the quiet part out loud, what impact do you think that had on even the Latinx community in terms of their, you know, freedom, willingness, openness about repeating some of these vile racist tropes, and just the concept that white supremacy is not just limited to white people?
Well, absolutely. Well, so this is an entire lecture in and of itself, and I think part of why we struggle to understand how there can be anti-blackness amongst Latinos, or because we group all people of color together, is because we have a really lack of sophistication of understanding how racial categories work. Right. So Latino is not a race. Latinos can be white. The majority of Latinos in the United States self-identify as white. Anti-blackness, of course, is rife across Latin America. Latin America engaged in African slavery. Mexico had slavery. The Dominican Republic, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, name them. They all engaged in African slavery. So, of course, anti-blackness exists in the Latino population. Just because you are not seen as white in America doesn't mean that you can't also be anti-black. And there is a long history of that. So we get shocked by this because we like to group all people who are not white together. But you can have Black Latinos, Asian Latinos, white Latinos, and you have long seen this political divide amongst Latinos, where a significant number of Latinos have supported Republican candidates, have been primed to Donald Trump's message, supported Republicans before Donald Trump. We like to kind of lump them into one racial group like we do with Black people, but you can't actually do that with Latinos. So frankly, I'm not surprised when any group of people exhibits anti-blackness. Anti-blackness is endemic in the United States. It is in the air that we breathe. You actually are quite exceptional in this country if you are not anti-black. So we shouldn't be shocked by this. We really have to be much more sophisticated in our racial analysis. Now, I do have to add, there is a lot of Black and brown unity. There have been people who have worked on this for decades. And even amongst the Latino community, you have many people who support Black Lives Matter and Black liberation. So what I'm saying is we have to stop thinking of this group as monolithic and understand that this is a very diverse group with very different experiences, who come from very different types of countries and communities. And so, yes, every diversity you'll see in any community, you will also see there, and that includes anti-Blackness.
And just final thought, reparations. I know that you believe, I've read that you feel that reparations is the answer, one way of righting the wrongs of slavery. California passed a piece of legislation to study reparations. There's been a commission that's been going around the state taking testimony. They've come out with a 500-page report, preliminary report. How hopeful are you that we will get to reparations in this country, whether it's through this California commission that may lead on it, whether you look at examples that are happening in places like Evanston, Illinois, what's happening at the federal level around reparations? Are you hopeful that in your lifetime, in my lifetime, in our lifetime, we are going to see some big state like California or our federal government actually go beyond making an apology for slavery and actually do restorative justice, reparative justice around the issue of slavery?
So as you know, the last chapter in the book is a chapter I wrote called Justice, and it makes the case for reparations, not just for slavery, but for the 100 years of legal apartheid in this country, which is what California's reparations bill is not addressing slavery, of course, because while there was enslavement in California, California was technically a free state, but what California did do is implement an entire architecture of racial apartheid, and that is really what the California bill is about. So this is what I'll say. I don't tend to be a hopeful person when it comes to race at all. Black people have been fighting for reparations since the time of slavery, after slavery, and now. And we are the one group that has not received reparations, even though slavery lasted longer than any of these other harms, except, of course, what happened to indigenous people. So I don't know that, I don't feel hope. What I do feel is that we are as close as we've ever been to getting reparations, that We are seeing it implemented at the local level, at the individual level, when the beach was given back to the Black family, and taken seriously at the state level and the federal level. In my lifetime, reparation has never been taken as a serious political issue. It's been seen as fringe and marginal, and that's just not the case anymore. So I won't try to predict the future, but what I will say is that's what I'm working towards. That's what so many others are working towards. And if there ever was a chance, we are the closest as we've ever come.
Well, I am speaking with Nikole Hannah-Jones. She is the author of the 1619 Project. This is a must read for everyone. She is kicking off the Leimert Park Village Book Fair, and we are so excited to have her this year as our featured author. If you have not read this book, you must read it, and you must follow Nikole on all social media platforms. Just follow the great work she is doing. We are so grateful to have been able to spend this time with you, and we know great things are going to continue to follow you and keep fighting that fight for reparations. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that California is going to do something. We're not going to let little bitty Evanston outdo us. We're going to show this nation how to do restorative and reparative justice, and I'm super excited about that. And hopefully we'll have you back at the book fair as we're celebrating what reparations can look like for this entire country. But again, thank you for sitting down with me today.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining.
Knowing our history is important, and we thank Nikole Hannah-Jones for her outstanding research and work, researching and preserving our history for generations to come. This is a publication that every home should have. Thank you, Nikole, for bringing our history to light. And thank you, Areva, for your probing questions and giving us some food for thought.